watched the Super Bowl last Sunday night. It's hard to believe that it's done. It was an awesome game. I'm not a Patriot fan, but to see the first overtime in Super Bowl history and to see it down to the wire, it was very, very exciting game to watch. But in the midst of that time, I bet you when is it Belichick who was the coach for the Patriots at halftime, as he was consoling his, and I don't think I would use the word consoling because he probably was yelling at his players, but he probably used two phrases because they had spent a year together and to get to that point, and that was to say, basically, don't forget who you are and where you came from. Don't forget who you are and where you came from. And I want you to remember that as we look at this morning's lesson. To remember who we are and where we came from. It's also the words my mother used every time we left the house. For those sports fans, though, I've got a story to tell you. There was a team, and they were fighting their rival, a college team, and they were playing, and it was a very close game, and the team, the visitors had punted, and the ball had rolled almost to the second-yard line, and so this team was getting ready to come out and try to move the ball all the way down to the goal line in order to win the game. It was down to just the minutes before the game was over, and so they run the team out there, and lo and behold, the first play, off this first set of downs, their star quarterback is injured. Has to be hauled off of the field in a stretcher, and so the coach is wondering what he's going to do. His second string quarterback didn't even dress. He's got the flu. But he's got this third string quarterback that's a freshman that's never played 1 minute of college ball in his life. The only thing that he's done is that he's a punter. He punts for the team, but he's never played quarterback in a game yet. He's a freshman, a new kid, and so he's wondering what he's going to do. And so he thinks the only hope I have is to tell him and give him these plays. So he pulls this young quarterback over and he says, now, what I want you to do is run our huge fullback, that big fullback Smith, and I want you to run him right down the middle, and I want us to just move out on these first two plays, to identically run our fullback in and just move away from the goal line so that you got enough room there so that you can punt the ball far, far away, just so that you can punt the ball far, far away. So I want you to run two plays and then punt. Okay. Quarterback runs out there, he's ready to run, and so they line up, and lo and behold, they run the first play, and the quarterback, young quarterback, gives the ball to Smith, and there is a hole as big as that you could run a semi through, and this halfback is running his way down the field that it takes half the other team to tackle him, and he reaches the 50-yard line. The 50-yard line. The crowd is going crazy. It's getting close to the end of the game. This touchdown could, if they get a touchdown, it could win the game for them. And so the quarterback goes up, gets them all lined up. They get in a hurry. Time's running out, and so they run the same play. And so the quarterback hands the football to Smith, and lo and behold, miracles of miracles. There's another big hole, and he gets down 45 yards. He's down to the 2-yard line, just about ready to the goal, and they stop. They're 6 feet away from the goal, 6 feet away from winning the game, and the crowd is just going crazy, crazy, crazy. And so they get up, they hurry up, and they get ready to run their play when the quarterback receives the ball, and then he runs back and he punts the ball, and it goes right into the crowd. People can't believe what he did. They couldn't believe that he punted the ball when they were sitting there on the 2-yard line. And so when he's running back to the sideline, the coach grabs him and he says, I want to know, what were you thinking when you punted the ball and called that play? Well, I was thinking, we must have the dumbest coach in the whole league. Well, one of the things that we need to be aware of as we look at today's lesson is that God allows us to call our own plays. God allows us to call our own plays. One of the best things that God has done to us is when he created us in his image, he gave us the opportunity to make choices. Choices that are good and bad, choices that can mess our lives up, or they can be a blessing. So today, as we look at today's lesson, it comes from Deuteronomy. And these are important words for us to understand, because these are Moses' last words to the children of Israel. They're literally standing on the banks of the Jordan River as they're waiting to cross over to go over into the Promised Land. For 40 years, Moses and the children of Israel have been wandering through the wilderness, preparing for this very moment. Moses is going to speak to them one last time. He knows that he can't cross over. He knows that he is going to die. And so these are his final words. And what I'd like you to do is kind of picture that it would be like a locker room scene. Basically, Moses has gathered the team, which would be about 1 million people, gathered around to give these words before they make their crossing, just like coaches would before they step out after a long season of getting to the Super Bowl and step out onto the field. It begins, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away, and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I've set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and holding fast to him. For that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Amen. Deuteronomy is an important book for the Jewish people. It, in a way, is a sermon that Moses gives in his parting, in his last hours, and his last days with those who he had traveled with for 40 years. Deuteronomy actually means it's remembering the law, and it's remembering really the story of those as they were called out of Egypt, as they were called out of slavery, and now they were standing really on the shore and looking over to the other side, to the Promised Land. What they had longed for, what they lived for. It's like as I said, a coach gathering his players in the locker room just before the game is beginning to play, just before they set on the field, and basically reminding them how important it is to remember what they did and who they are before they go out into the field. To remember that they are a team that has worked hard to get to this point, and now we're turning you loose, and you have the choice to win or to lose. It's up to you. And Moses is basically saying you've got the choice between life and death, curse or blessing. It is your choice. It is one of those choices that God gives to us. It's important for us to understand that Deuteronomy tells that story, and it's a wonderful story that basically rewrites and tells us and informs us from the beginning of them calling out of slavery to receiving the law, getting all of what they endured together in the wilderness, and now you are ready to cross into the Promised Land. And these are Moses' words of encouragement as he bids them to go on. Moses uses basically two words that are important for us to understand. One is that you must obey. In order that you understand what life is and choose life, is that you obey the commands of the Lord and to love the Lord. So obey is important. Obedience is important. The law for Moses was important. He was the giver of the law. And so that was the one thing that he wanted to pass on to those children of Israel, is not to forget from where you came from. That you came from slavery, but you came from the law that has brought you together, that helped us to maneuver all through the wilderness, that has got us to the point that we're ready to cross over into the promised land. Now, to obey. Do you have that as part of your scout oath, to obey the law of the path? Yeah. We don't like to talk much about obey. And this week, when Jen and I were talking about parenting, we were talking about how hard it is to parent when you want your children to understand that they need guidance. They need sometimes to be corrected. They need sometimes to follow the laws or the rules. And how hard that is to talk straight with them and to get them to understand that there is this law of consequence. There is this law of consequences that we deal with that if you break the law, say you go through the stop sign and you crash and you break the law, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. In the same way with our lives, the kids need to understand that there are consequences in the choices that we make, whether we're choosing right or wrong, whether we're choosing life and death, whether we're choosing curses or blessings, that there are consequences, that we will reap what we sow. That we reap what we sow, and it's so important. And as Jen and I were talking, that sometimes we were looked upon as being strict with our children. But all we were wanting to do was them to understand how important it is for their own safety, for the safety and kindness of others, that there are certain guidelines and certain boundaries that we need to follow in order to obey and to be obedient. Secondly, Moses uses the word love, to love the Lord. And what Deuteronomy is that it reminds us of the love of God. This is God who heard the wailing and the crying of the Israelites, the children of Israel in Egypt when they were slaves. And he led them out of slavery into the promised land. A couple of hundred years later, when Israel had strayed away, they had stopped following God, they followed other gods, and they had strayed away, that they were literally obliterated, nearly obliterated by a conquering nation. Their temple was destroyed. And in that was a nation that was broken. A nation that was broken. Just as Moses had warned them, if you stray away from God, it will lead to curses and disappointment, hardship. A king arose out of Israel at that time, Josiah, a young king who, as he began to mature and grow, he became one of the best and the greatest. But one of the first things he did as a nation was to say, for us to rebuild ourselves, we need to rebuild the temple. And so the rebuilding of the temple became the process that they were, in a sense, of rebuilding themselves. And in the process of rebuilding that temple and pulling away the stones and such, they found a scroll that had been lost for ages, a scroll that had been lost and forgotten. It so happened to be the scroll of Deuteronomy. And so the chief priest was so excited about finding the scroll that Deuteronomy was written on, that he ran to Josiah, and Josiah said, would you read to me this? It's found in 2 Kings 22 now. And so as Josiah was hearing the words of Deuteronomy, he began to realize what God had done for them and how they had forgotten, that God had led them out of slavery and led them to the promised land, and that this love story God had done this because of his love for them, and that they had forgotten the commands of the law, that they had strayed as a nation. That then Josiah then said, he began to weep and to wail and to begin to tear his clothes off, because it was a way of showing grief and remorse of what they had done as a nation in straying away from God. That they chose curses as opposed to blessings. So as a nation, they began to rebuild and to grow and turn their way back to God. To realize that the commandments were not a heavy burden, but was a way of bringing life and life to their lives. Moses says to choose life. You have the choice between blessings and curses, life and death. And I say to you, choose life. It's so important for us to understand that we also remember who we are, that we are children of God, and for the children of Israel to understand that and to remember that. When I was at Iowa State, I lived in the dormitory where the football team lived, in the towers out on the south side of Ames. And believe me, during the football season, it was very nice. You know, the football players were focused. They were at practice. They had study time after they ate. The only thing is that we watched them go through training table, and they would pull out these T-bone steaks and put them on their plates, and we would get mystery meat, and they put it on our plates. But after the football season, life changed, because they weren't as focused. They were just like animals that got turned loose, because they no longer was hitting each other on the football squad in the football field. And so for little people like me, it was dangerous. And we had this guy on my floor called Rich Moore. Rich was one of the most mouthiest kids that I've ever known in my life. And he was squirrely. I mean, he was small and tiny, but he had a mouth as wide as the ocean. And one of the things that he did was that he came from Bettendorf. Anybody here from Bettendorf? My understanding is that they're Hawkeye fans there. And so he was bold enough to live in the dormitory where the Iowa State football team lived and ate and studied, and to be wearing Hawkeye clothing on campus, and then mouthing off to these football players, because he just never knew how to shut up. As we were going up and down the elevator all this time, you guys, and we had bad teams when I was at Iowa State. I mean, really, it was even before Iowa State and Iowa played each other, so it wasn't that bad, but it was bad. But to hear him talk about how well the Hawkeyes were doing and all of that, and we would just stand away from Rich, because we knew someday he was going to get it. Well, after Christmas break was over and we got back to classes and stuff, a few of us come back from class, and we walk up to the elevator ready to go up to our floor, and the elevator door opens, and there's Rich. He has been duct taped to the back of the elevator, and his Hawkeye stocking cap was stuffed in his mouth. So he was stuck there, and we knew what had happened. The football players had decided enough was enough. He had forgotten where he was and what he was about, which was. And so, being the guy I am, I reached for his stocking cap, and off he went. He went off about the football players, and blue was about as blue as I've ever heard about these football players and who they are. Just wait till I get them. Just wait till I get them, and all of this. And the guy I was with yelled here and said, "Put the thing back in his mouth." We have to remember who we are and what we're about, and to remember that we are children of God. And so Moses used the words obey and love as something that we have a choice in our lives. And we as Christians have one more, and that is Jesus Christ. One who tells us about God's love, who is there to support us and guide us in our lives. Jan and I, one of the favorite things that we do, and Gene, I'm glad you're here talking about your book about hiking, because one of the things that we love to do is hike. And we get to places that are high. In fact, one of our goals is the the Teton Crest Trail. Last year when the national parks had celebrated their 100th anniversary, they listed the top 100 hikes in the national parks, and the Teton Crest Trail is number 3 in the nation as far as beauty. It's an awesome hike, and we have covered 3/4 of it, and our goal is to get the 4th of it. And it's an incredible hike. It's 20 miles. It starts from one end of the Tetons to the other end of the Tetons, and walks its way across the Continental Divide. And we get to the point where the altitude is so high, and we're up walking the ridges of the mountains that you get above the tree line, and you get to the point that you're off of the trail, and you get sometimes walking across the snow that never melts. And the only way to find your way and to keep yourself on the trail is to follow the cairns. Now, if you look at the bulletin cover this morning, there's a picture of the cairns. This is exactly what we're talking about this morning. In the cover of your bulletin is a cairn, a stack of rocks that are placed as a way of marking the way to follow the trail. And there are those people that like myself, when I get to one and I'm kind of catching a breath because you're up at over 10,000 feet, just put another rock on there, and I tell Jan I'm looking for a rock just to catch my breath. But it's a way of marking the way so that others may follow and stay on the trail. And the church has to realize that that's what we are about. Because we have a generation that needs to remember the story that there's a God of love. It's a historical love that goes back to many generations. It was demonstrated through Jesus Christ. And in his life, death, and resurrection, we find the power that gives us the guidance to help us guide us in our daily walk with God. And so it's important for us because every day we have a choice between life and death, and curse and blessing. We make that choice, and we make that choice as a church. Whether we're going to live or die, whether we're going to be a cursing or whether we're going to be a blessing. Moses says, choose life. Christ, through his life, says, choose life. And this morning, I say to you, choose life. Let us pray. Gracious God, as we come before you, we are mindful that many have walked the path before us. Many who are faithful and helped us guide our way. And so, Lord, as we walk this path of faith, help us, Lord, by guiding us with your love. And remember that we have others who are following us, that we may help mark the way, help guide them along the way, and encouraging them to stay on the road that chooses life. Amen.